to energize Republican voters.
We have to keep the House, because if you listen to Maxine Waters, she goes around saying, we will impeach him. We will impeach him. We got to go out and we got to fight like hell, and we got to win the House and we got to win the Senate.
We have quite the power panel right now. Let's bring in Democratic strategist Morris Reed, Republican strategist Lauren Zelt, Democratic strategist Chris Kofinis, Ned Ryan, former speechwriter for President George W. Bush, and Abigail Tracy, staff news writer for Vanity Fair. As I said, it's a powerful punch you guys are going to give us here, so let's get to it. Morris, you have the Democrats who've certainly been divided on the issue of impeachment talks at this stage. It's partly because Republicans could end up using it to rally their own voter turnout. But should Democrats agree to, at this point, stop calling for impeachment?
I don't think so. I think it's a rallying cry for their base, just as Trump is using it to energize his people. I'm not sure how many people in Washington, Michigan know who Maxine Waters is, but certainly it's a rallying cry on both sides. So he's doubling down on it, and I'm for sure that the Democrats will do it for the progressive. If you're in a moderate state or a moderate district, you're certainly not saying that, but for the Democrats to rally the progressive, this is going to work. It's going to energize the base. Okay.
Lauren, is it risky for Republicans to use the threat of impeachment to rally their voters?
No, it's a smart move on the Republican side. I'm actually surprised to hear Morris's answer, because I do think that overall this impeachment talk, really all it does is help to drive voter turnout on the Republican side this fall.
Okay, Morris, do you want to respond?
I think that if you're looking at a progressive district, this is going to work. If you're a moderate Democrat, you're not saying this is a nuanced thing, and this is an asymmetric war. So you have to look at where the battlegrounds are. One of the things that when I learned from working for Ron Brown is you let Democrats run the way they need to run to win their district, to get them to Washington. You don't dictate them. So if someone feels they need to do it, we should certainly be behind them in doing it.
Okay. Chris, I'm going to bring you in here and talk about the Quinnipiac University poll, which says that if Democrats regain control of the House, you have 71% of Democratic voters. They want them to start the impeachment proceedings. So how do you think that should factor into Democratic strategies in the midterms?
Well, I mean, I think to some extent it appeals to Democrats on the left. I think the challenge that an impeachment message has is if the goal here is to, to create kind of a wave. This is not just to pick off seats that you're going to win anyway. To pick off those Trump seats, to pick off those moderate Republicans, you want to focus on the bread and butter issues. And I think you also want to focus on what is, I think, to most Americans, the big issue, which is, President Trump's temperament, his style, the way he leads, his policy positions, his convictions, his rhetoric. That is where he is weak. That is where I think the American people, both Republicans, I would say, and Democrats, obviously, are just tired of. I think, making this a midterm all about impeachment is kind of jumping a little bit ahead. It can be a factor, I think, in some races, but it's not a national narrative that you want, I think, focus on. You want to focus on where the vulnerabilities are. The vulnerabilities are there, and they're obvious.
Ned, the president certainly mentioned California Democrat Maxine Waters, got those boos there. Well, she appeared with MSNBC's Joy Reid just prior to this broadcast, and she says she is not going to be backing down from her calls for impeachment. She thinks it's really just a matter of time until the Republicans out there are forced to make a rather difficult choice about their own support for the president. Let's listen to a bit of what she said. Here it is.
I believe if the facts are unveiled, whether it is in the next 6 months, before the November elections or after, that Republicans are going to be hard-pressed to stand with this president and to deny that he has colluded with Russia and that he's obstructed justice. I think even as the Republicans see it now, some of them are whispering. They are embarrassed. They're worried. They're scared that, this president is going to take them down eventually.
I'm curious if you're hearing the same whispers, because is that wishful thinking on her part, or do you really hearing that from Republican colleagues? Oh, okay. You think it's wishful thinking?
No. I have been hoping and praying and begging that this would become, the 2018 midterms would become an up or down vote on impeachment, because I do think it makes it a very visceral issue for both the Democrat and Republican base. And I think it is something that the Republican base needs to get energized over. When you look at some of the elections that have taken place over the last year, year and a half in the special elections, I do think the Republican base has been a little short on the enthusiasm gap. I think this is something that actually gets them fired up and energized. So I've been hoping that Democrats would make this an issue. You see, Tom Steyer out there doing his impeachment rallies. You see that dozens and dozens of Democrats in the House had signed on to impeachment proceedings. I'm hoping that this becomes a central issue in the midterms for this year, because I don't think it'll play well for the Democrats, because it will energize the Republican base. And let's not forget, Alex, midterms are about the base. If this energizes the base, I think Republicans keep the House.
You think they do that in spite of what history says, Ned? I mean, the expectation would be they're going to take the House, the Democrats.
I do, and it partly because I'm looking at these congressional generic polls. You look at the recent ABC Washington Post one, the generic poll only shows Democrats up by 4 points, but even more importantly, beneath the surface, Alex, Republicans had about very likely to vote, in the very likely to vote category, Republicans had a 6-point advantage over Democrats. And what should be troubling to Democrats is that voters under 30 were saying that they were less than 40% likely to vote, and there was a massive gap in enthusiasm between the white vote, the black vote, and the Hispanic vote. So you start to look at these congressional generic ballots. If Republicans make this about a visceral issue, whether it's impeachment, whether it's guns, I think it serves them well. And let's not forget, a lot of these districts where Democrats are trying to compete to take back the 24 seats that are necessary to take the majority, these are going to be a lot tougher to take than Democrats think, because of how they have been structured and in the Republican versus Democrat vote.
Ned, do you really think that those Republicans and independents who aren't in love with this president, who aren't part of that base, that 34% we hear about all the time, do you really think this is an issue that's going to motivate them to come out in the midterms and vote this issue?
Oh, I think it'll be more than just impeachment. I want to talk about guns. I want to talk about a vision for the future. I think Republicans need to start telling a very compelling vision for what happens if they get the majorities back in 2019. I'm not seeing enough of that right now, but I'm starting to hear, talk about, well, let's make the tax cuts permanent for small businesses, for individuals. I would like to see them actually put a positive message forward of how they're going to have responsible reform of the entitlement programs. They have to start putting forward a compelling vision as to how they're going to continue to make the economy better, wages, jobs, all of these things. At the same time, I think impeachment, I think guns, I think there are a lot of other issues that will fire up the base. So I think it's not just one or two issues. It's probably those 3 or 4 issues that I just discussed that will get not only the base, but those that are more of a little undecided at this point.
Abigail, I'm coming to you in just 1 second. But Morris, I have to ask you, because how many times have you been on this broadcast and you talk about how the Democrats have got to talk about issues? That's what they have to focus on. Is that what you think they have to focus on still, that it's not just being a party of opposition, that they have to say, here's what we are all about, and that's going to resonate and motivate voters to get out in November?
Listen, the way you win elections are being aspirational and forward-leaning. What Ned is saying is the complete opposite of what the president of the White House is. He is not a vision. He's not a vision guy. The Democrats need to walk a very fine line, because a lot of these guys are spiking the football too early. They need to communicate. They need to really connect with the voters and articulate a vision. When you hear this talk about impeachment, you're really hearing it from the progressives, people in California that are skewing very Democratic. If you look at where Democrats have won the election so far, they focused on the issues and connecting with the American people, not talking about Donald Trump. So if the Democrats on issue, I feel very positive that they'll be able to win. I'm not for sure they'll get both chambers, but certainly they should be able to take the House back.
So, Abigail, as the reporter on this panel, and you're not one of the strategists for either side, I'm curious what role we should expect the president to play in the midterm campaign strategies.
Well, I think that's a little unclear right now. You see his comments that he made last night, and he's really brushing aside this entire narrative that there might even be a blue wave at all. So I think one of the interesting things that you're seeing is, this question of whether he's in denial about the fact that he does have a low approval rating, and that you do look at a congressional generic ballot. I must have been looking at different numbers, but the one that I looked at this morning, an average, had, the Democratic spread as plus 6.9 points, which roughly would translate to about 21 seats in the House flipping. So I think one of the interesting things is whether, people can impress upon him this potential threat that he could face and the Republican Party could face in 2018 midterms, and whether, that motivates him to really adopt a strategy that can help lift others up along, in some of these races, congressional and Senate.
Okay.
Frankly, if Trump was smart, he would want to sell out the House and the Senate now because it'll be a better chance for him to get reelected in 2020. The fear is if they punish him now, from a Democratic standpoint, they'll reward him in 2020.